Join Stephanie and others in welcoming you to this fourth annual Global Congress for Animal Welfare. I'm a member of the Advisory Council of the Center for Zoo Animal Welfare, and I have the great honor to introduce Ron Kagan, one of the conveners of this conference. If I may begin on a personal note, Ron, hey Ron. This introduction is both. Yes, thank you. This introduction is both of you and for you.
Okay.
I've always felt that you've welcomed and encouraged my views as a representative of the animal rights movement. It's been my privilege to partner with the Center in preserving some of the proceedings of these conferences in the Animals and Society Institute publication, Journal of Applied Animal Welfare Science, and I hope to do so again for this conference. Ron's accomplishments need no review for this audience. So let me take a moment, at the risk of being presumptuous, to characterize him as an individual. I have always felt that Ron is the full package, to use the clinical term.
Is this a proposal?
They won't see me if I'm on my knees.
Oh, God.
His passion, his sincerity, his authenticity, and this is his gift, put people at ease, allowing him to speak directly, to challenge the practices and policies, often at the level of the basic assumption of the several overlapping but also distinct communities, zoos and sanctuaries, conservationist and animal welfarist, reformist and abolitionist. Ron has led the movement to complement the several functions of the contemporary zoo with a renewed and reinvigorated emphasis on the welfare of the individual animal. By drawing a strong distinction between good care and good welfare, the latter of which he defines broadly as well-being, he has expanded the zoo's community's task of providing social, intellective, and behavioral enrichment for individual animals and facilitated the development of evidence-based science, particularly the burgeoning field of animal welfare science, to effectively realize these. Through these efforts, institutional, educational, and frankly political, he has at once expanded the potential of the institution of the zoo as presently constituted and established its limitations, both in the realm of individual welfare as well as in species conservation. On the side of the zoo visitor, through the sophisticated use of high-tech venues, and on the soft side of representations of animals in art and history, he has worked toward making the zoo visitor's experience one of, in Denise Levitoff's poetic phrase, coming into animal presence, facilitating access to the lived world of each individual animal so that the zoo does not so much exhibit an animal, show an animal outside of his or her subjective world, as help us to inhabit that world, to know the lionness of the lion, and yes, even the frogness of the frog. And through this, to understand and respect them not only as representatives of a species, but also as individuals who experience the world in species-specific and in individually unique ways. So please join me in giving it up for Ron Kagan, the icon of progressive change in the world of the zoo.
Oh, thank you, Ken. Ken doesn't follow direction. I said very, very short on introduction. On the other hand, that's the nicest one I've ever had, so hard to complain. I hope you have all had a lot of coffee because I'm going through a lot of stuff really fast, and we do want to try to stay on track. But first of all, a big thank you. First of all, to the staff here, Scott, Carter, Stephanie, and all of the Center for Zoo Animal Welfare staff. I think all four of them are in the room, along with Scott. And to our International Advisory Committee for the Center for Zoo Animal Welfare, and most of those members are here as well. And to all of you who've made such an effort to come here and spend 3 days trying to really tackle what has been a vexing issue for a very long time. So obviously, all of us who are here are experts. We all care deeply about animals and what's best for animals. Presumably everybody does understand the difference between good care and good welfare. Caring is provisioning. That does not necessarily mean that someone has great welfare. I often use the provocative analogy that you can keep people in a prison for a very long lifetime. They don't have great welfare, but you are caring for them. So I'm not at all suggesting zoos are prisons. They aren't. They probably could have been defined that way 50 years ago, but a lot has changed. Everybody here has a lot of valuable contributions to make, and absolutely everybody here has a lot to learn. I'm including myself, of course. Every one of us has major responsibilities to animals. We've all seen constant improvements for decades. One of the people who's not here is Randy Malamud, who wrote a book 20 years ago called Reading Zoos, Reading Animals. And he noted that for decades, the zoo community has said they keep making these incredible advancements. And you just wonder, after saying that for decades and decades and decades, at some point, the welfare of animals in zoos should actually be spectacular. I don't think any of us feel that we're quite there, and I think we all need to spend the next 3 days being very open. This is not about bashing, but if we're not open about this, and we keep telling ourselves that everything is great because we have great intentions, we're not going to make the kind of progress that we just really have to make. The final two things. Everybody has inconsistencies, and I could reel off a whole bunch that I have. I love to drive fast cars, and the fuel mileage on those is terrible. That is inconsistent with me caring about the environment. So we all have inconsistencies. I don't think any of us necessarily try to have everything be perfect, but I think all of us are on a journey and need to be on a journey. Slide 3. There we go. So, a distinction here. We all, in the zoo and aquarium world, are very focused on conservation. That is welfare of species. It is not animal welfare. It's not the welfare of the individual. And that is really important for us to realize that while we continue to do greater and greater work in terms of conservation, that is not the same as improving animal welfare. This is for Mark Beckoff. This is the Partula snail that we've been working with for well over 25 years. There's an awful lot of work with charismatic megavertebrates. That's kind of known as speciesism. We need to really try to reframe all of this, make sure that conservation is not a beauty contest. There are many zoos. For instance, Jenny Gray's zoo does a ton of work with a lot of species that nobody knows anything about. They're small. They're not obviously charismatic to humans. We need to really think about where our investment goes. Like the rest of the zoo world, we have conservation projects all over the world. You'll notice in our direct field conservation, there are very few things here which you would call charismatic megavertebrates. So we're doing a lot of work with these creepy crawly or relatively small animals that are not necessarily headline grabbing. We've got a lot of partners. This is just a small handful. We're very, very proud of the fact that we work with the Humane Society, both HSUS and HSI. We work with PETA. We work with IFA. We work with many other conservation organizations. And we think that is a part of the future if we want to be successful at creating a great life for animals and also a much better relationship for between humans and non-humans. Just a quick overview, because some of you won't have a chance to go through our zoo. I'm only going to spend about 5 minutes on this. We are fully powered by wind energy because we think if we're a conservation organization, we should be reflecting that in everything we do. We don't sell plastic water bottles. We just completed building the first zoo anaerobic digester in the country. So we're using the manure of the animals to power the animal hospital. A lot of our exhibits actually are about indigenous wildlife. This boardwalk is made out of plastic bottle caps. and it's a fantastic way to go through it. Speaking of charismatic megavertebrates, some 17 years ago, we opened the National Amphibian Conservation Center. The Wall Street Journal called it Disneyland for toads. Another example that you do not have to work with the charismatic megavertebrates, and we all know that amphibians are in a very serious crisis. If you have time, I suggest you go through. You're in the Ford Education Center. There's a lot that goes on in here, including this is the home of the Academy for Humane Education. And if you have time, upstairs, just around the corner, is our Humane Science Lab, where we help teachers and students learn about biology and science without harming animals. So we have models and we have simulations and many other things, but most of us learned zoology and about animals in the traditional way, which was filled with very unthoughtful things like dissections. Also in this building is our Wild Adventure Simulator. This is where we think that theater and technology are extremely important, far more important than people like me giving lectures, in getting people to think and experience and feel stuff. So this is a motion-based cabin. You have an opportunity, I think, this afternoon to go in it. It takes up to 30 people, and you become different animals. And it is trying to create some empathy so that we can generate more compassion, more kind of a sense of, gee, I wonder what the animals, the non-human animals, are experiencing with all sorts of challenges, some of which humans create. And of course, you're in this theater, and we can do all sorts of cool things in here. Oh, I'm sorry. So we can make it snow. You know, again, this is all theatrical. This is not to make money. In fact, we don't make money on this kind of stuff. But we want to get people excited, and we want people to understand that you know, we have lots of different senses. So we can do all sorts of cool special effects in here, and that's also this afternoon an option for you. We also have Science on a Sphere. The National Zoo is here. They also have one. There are 150 of these around the world in science centers. But this is really fantastic technology that allows us to help people understand things like climate change. And that is very much our responsibility, to help the public, take the public's fascination with animals and interest in animals, and use it to get a conversation going about things like climate change. So with Science on a Sphere, which is connected to NOAA and NASA, in the course of 1 minute, people see Earth as if they would see it from 2,000 miles in space, and they can see what's happened in 1 minute over the past 100 years with the polar ice caps. Once you do that, there's no more argument about climate change. So we have to keep thinking of ways, whether it's technology or others, theatrical ways to get this done. Ken did mention art. You will see tomorrow night, I think, you'll be in the Wildlife Interpretive Gallery for dinner. We've got some really amazing art in here that we commissioned, including this bullet elephant, to try to provoke people to think about what is our relationship with animals. Now, I'm going to go through this super fast. There just isn't time to do it. But these are just a few of the highlights. I don't know if you can see it in the back because the font's fairly small, but a few of our highlights over the past 25 years with respect to our journey on welfare and ethics, and we keep going, and there's plenty to do. So we started doing animal rescues way back in '92, starting with a crack house lion that was in it was essentially a guard dog in a house in Detroit. We've done thousands of rescues since then. We've done a whole film series about issues, many of them relating to animal welfare. We've partnered with lots of humane organizations, and we do Meet Your Best Friend at the Zoo, which is the largest remote pet adoption in the country, now with 23,000 dogs and cats that have been saved. So you just see a bunch of things here. So for us, this has been a journey. We didn't just wake up one day and go, oh my gosh, we've got welfare to deal with. we hosted 16 years ago an AZA conference here called Animal Welfare 911. For those of you who are not American, 911 is the emergency call number. We felt back then it was an emergency, that we weren't addressing it enough. We still feel there's a long way to go for all of us. In 2004, we ended our elephant program. That created a bit of a stir, but it certainly was just one of many decisions that happened before and after. We also premiered a film that won a lot of international awards about the evolution of zoos and animals and entertainment. We created the Center for Zoo Animal Welfare in 2008. Believe it or not, in 2010, can you imagine 27,000 animals being rescued in one operation that we partnered with PETA and HSUS and others on that. And then the Center for Zoo Animal Welfare really got started and did lots and lots of conferences and workshops, and of course with today. Now, we also do a couple of other things. We created a wolf habitat a couple of years ago, and the only reason we did it was because in the U.S., wolf hunting started up. And we thought, if we want standing, if we want to be able to talk to our 1.7 million people, and by the way, just so you know the numbers, because we've heard people say that they were afraid about the elephant decision because we'd lose audience. We had 1 million visitors a year. In the year before the elephants were sent to sanctuary. Now, 12 years later, we're at 1.7 million visitors a year. It is a good business decision, not a bad business decision, to do what you think is best for the animals. And sometimes that means sending them away. Sometimes that means rescuing and bringing them here. But anyway, this allows us to explain to the 1.7 million visitors that wolves are our friends. So you'll be in here later. This is probably going to annoy some of our friends, but my opinion is it may in fact be possible to have situations where life could be better for individual animals in zoos than it is in the wild. I'm not at all suggesting that we take animals out of the wild, because that is not something we do, but I have been to Antarctica so many times and watched the life of a penguin. I would want to live here, and you'll see this later tonight. This is part of the theater in there that you'll experience. You cross the Drake Passage to get there. This is one of the main galleries when you're underwater. And oh, the sound is working. This is the penguins have a lot of area that can circle around all of this. This is just from one side. And this is part of, again, the technology and special effect of iceberg calving. But the whole idea is to get people to understand climate change, and the whole building is a giant tabular iceberg that's cracking in half with a waterfall. The whole idea is climate change is causing all of this, and we use the power of the penguins and the technology to get people to go, wow, this is real. Now, I want to talk about the future. To talk about the future, we're going to spend 1 minute talking about the past. I'm sure all of you know that the term Bedlam comes from the Royal Bethlehem Hospital in England, and for hundreds of years, what people did for entertainment, at least in London, sorry to all of you in the audience, I know it wasn't you, they would go to the insane asylum, the Royal Bethlehem Hospital, and you'd pay a little bit of money, and then you would go, and it was a freak show. It's really not a coincidence that when that closed to the public, the London Zoo opened, and zoos became public and started opening up around the world. And they were very much about displaying oddities. I'm not going to put up here some of the other stuff that's historical, but it's shocking when you read what we were doing about, bringing in gorillas and putting in our guides, if you hear that we've got a gorilla, you have to come to the zoo. really fast because they die really quickly of sullenness and all sorts of depression. It's striking. So, indeed, an enormous amount has changed, but we can't escape the history, and we need to be mindful of it. You fast forward from that beginning in the 1800s to, merely 50 years ago, those chimps were here. That was a chimp show here. And we weren't apparently unique. There were lots of other places like that. We keep polar bears in places like this. We have a challenged history. We are not the same as we were then, but we have to understand that that is part of why the outside world wonders about us and needs to hear from us how focused and obsessive we are about improving conditions. Ringling Brothers has just stopped, but there still is a connection between the zoo world and the circus world, and that seems a little inconsistent with a real commitment to focus on animal welfare. I couldn't resist this. I don't know if you can all read it. It's kind of a nice twist. The elephant is saying, "That's interesting. I've always dreamed of running away and joining the jungle." Zoos and aquariums are a reflection of how humans think and feel about other animals. So you have one species that creates this place and then captures, and now it's very rare that animals are taken out of the wild. Exhibits, educates, entertains, charges and raises money, cares for, breeds, studies, and conserves other species. And by the way, my opinion about charging money, I think a lot of ethicists feel like that is a huge problem with our paradigm. I don't. I think we need to charge more money when people go to national parks. We charge lots of money when people go on photo safaris. Having people pay to have great experiences with nature is a great thing. And if we can make the business of that work so that it's not just hunters that are paying for conservation, I think that's terrific, as long as the animals are not exploited. And that is absolutely the key on this. So, are we centers of great care, conservation, science, and education where animals thrive, not just survive? Are we centers of compassion and rescue? Or, as some critics say, are we centers of confinement and cruelty where animals might suffer? We have to answer these questions, and we need good answers. There was a great book, I think it was about 10 or 15 years ago, I'm sure many of you are aware of it, called How Monkeys See the World. So I think our question has to be, how do zoo monkeys see the world? And, we've got, well, we don't have something like this, but we've got reptiles that have these wonderful murals in back. I don't think the snake thinks, oh, cool, I'm in Thailand. I don't know that, but I think that we have to be careful not to convince ourselves that by doing some of the artificial stuff we do, that somehow we actually have made it natural. I'm not an ethicist, even though I have taught animal ethics, but I kind of want to ask this question, and it seems to me that if we could say yes to these things, then we could argue. Wow, 2 minutes. So I'm not going to read these to you. Hopefully you'll read them yourself. We really have to advance animal well-being. There's just not enough going on. And we need to be a loud voice. I need to back up here because I wanted you to see this. We are too quiet about the things that we know are wrong. There are 230 accredited zoos in the U.S. There are over 2,000 others that are roadside zoos, and for the most part, those are horrible. And we do not speak out anywhere nearly enough about that. We've got to make sure that all of our environments, physical and social, are fabulous with lots of control and choice for each individual animal, and recognizing each and every one has personality. We've done a lot of rescues. Polar bears now live here at the Arctic Ring of Life, which is the largest polar bear facility in the States. And it also is where seals are, and every single seal there is also a rescue. So that polar bear came from that circus. We've rescued junkyard lions, not just crack house lions. This wallaby was in a garage. Now it lives in our Australian area. This is Hams. He was a beer mascot, and he lived here for many years. That's a wound on his face from a pitchfork. Not from here, obviously. This was the rescue I was talking about. We've even rescued race horses, and so that we can have standing and talk about horse racing. These cubs, their mom was shot by a hunter in, I don't know about a hunter, but shot by somebody in Alaska a mile away from Sarah Palin's house. I'm not suggesting. We do a lot of rescuing in the wild. This is in South Africa when the oil spill was there. And sometimes rescue is release. And that's what we did with elephants. And we're thinking about some other things now. We are thinking about perhaps a lot of the birds that can't fly, the large birds. You have to build a huge aviary to allow large birds to fly properly. So we're thinking that's a very important discussion, and we've started moving things out. Some vultures back to Africa and some other large birds to places that are in climates that have huge aviaries, don't need to worry about snow loads, etc. You have something in your packets about the Center for Zoo Animal Welfare, so I won't go through this, and I know that the time is up, so I need to just quickly go through. You see, we do workshops where we try to get the staff of zoos from around the world to really experience life like the animals in our care do. We do all sorts of research here. This is infrared thermography, which we've found can be useful for a whole range of things. A lot of other typical welfare research. We've created a framework, and this is something which I'm hoping by the end of these 3 days that the zoo community basically says, look, this has to be woven into accreditation. We've got to have a framework that everybody buys into and that everybody uses. It starts with institutional philosophy and policy, putting in the resources to make that happen, and then executing and evaluating. These are just samples of the documents and the process that we use and that we've used here and in China and elsewhere, and it works. So finally, what should we do in the future? Most relevant choice, preference, and control back to the animal. Walk the talk. We still don't do enough in conservation, even though we do a lot. We have to ensure great welfare, not just good care. We need this framework or something similar, and it has to be central to accreditation. We've got to be really outspoken on animal well-being and on human responsibility. We need to speak out about bad zoos or aquariums or other compromised situations. Got to be totally tuned into the animals. This is being patient-centered, which is a weird connotation because it's not that they're ill, but the focus should be on what they need and want. Only have appropriate species. Climate is still something that doesn't get talked about enough, but when I started in the zoo world, there were polar bears living in Texas zoos. How stupid was that? And shame on us for not knowing that back then. So it wasn't us. It was, our previous generation of folks. But we need to really think about this and be far more, thoughtful and active about it. Helping species and populations is critical. That's conservation. We need to help individuals. That's welfare. Animals have to be able to react naturally and to initiate natural behaviors. We have to have optimal, not minimal, physical and social environments. Public nurseries are stressful, constant rigorous evaluation. There should be very little breeding, frankly, in zoos, other than things that really, really need it for conservation purposes. Exotic animal outreach can be really stressful and misguided. It can encourage people to want animals as pets, which is not what we want. We've got to be committed to care for life and have retirement plans for every animal. We've got to be open and transparent. That's what this is about. Seriously, we need to be able not to criticize each other, but to basically raise issues and struggle with them. And we need to talk to the public about a lot of controversial issues like climate change. challenge our own assumptions. Good intentions don't always lead to good welfare. We need to deal with vocabulary. I know recently there was a discussion about that at the mid-year at AZA, but using the word collection for living things, I mean, it doesn't make sense. Or specimen or ambassador. We've got to question things like cetaceans and elephants and great apes and large carnivores, and as I told you, even birds. Resist speciesism. I think we need to view ourselves as guardians and not owners. The idea that some still sell and buy animals in the zoo world, I don't understand that in 2017, and I really would question that. We absolutely have to join arms with the animal welfare community, the animal protection community, the ethics community. We're about to change our Center for Zoo Animal Welfare, and it's going to be the Center for Zoo Animal Welfare and Ethics. And we are going to bring ethicists into our council and have it be much more central. Even pest control in zoos, we have a coyote that's running around the zoo right now. And they're in our community. It's not just here. And we're so distressed about this. I'm just going to zip through here because this is the end of my talk. There should be lots of discussion at some point during the 3 days about culling that goes on in zoos. I know our European colleagues have strong views on that, and we should be discussing this. A little bit of stress is fine for all of us. We all experience it. We all have compromises. Too much is bad, obviously. Ultimately, the future, I think, is far fewer animals and far fewer species in each zoo and aquarium, and a complete focus on the quality for those animals. I'm so fortunate and appreciative that we've got some people who lead the compassionate conservation initiatives here during the 3 days. A lot of our reintroduction programs basically pick a winner, and whenever you pick a winner, you're also picking losers. We've got to be really thoughtful about when we do these reintroductions about what the impact is on the wildlife that is already there. Think black-footed ferrets. Great for them, not so great for the prairie dog that all of a sudden has got a new predator in town. I'm not saying we shouldn't be doing introductions. We do a lot of them, mostly with amphibians, but we need to really be thinking about all of this. There's never enough enrichment or unpredictability, and we talk a lot about enrichment, and honestly, let's try to understand just how important it is. We really could be sanctuaries for humans and non-human animals. And an investment in the wild, our conservation work, means nothing to the individual animal that lives in our zoos and aquariums. So, speaking of enrichment, I don't know if you can read this, but I thought it was pretty good. And thank you. I know I'm about 5 minutes over, which I was hoping not to be, but thank you.